Hello and welcome to another episode of the Two Charlottes Spill the Tea. This week we have decided to delve into what is potentially a bit of a taboo subject of what comes after life. So we're going to talk about death, mortality, what we think happens when you die, how we feel about it, and we've got some input from some people from our social medias this week. So hopefully this will be quite an interesting episode because, lots of people have different views on what happens when you die. Like, where do you go? What's next after life? So I will start off by just saying what I think happens, and then obviously, Charlotte, you can let us know what you think happens, and we can kind of delve into different side of things. So I'm not a very religious person. I'd class myself as more of a spiritual person. I'm pretty sure that once your physical body dies, your soul goes somewhere. So I think, because I've had experiences with mediums and, I do a lot of like spirit guide meditations and, I do see a lot of signs and symbols, and I'm sure it's from the other side. It's from somewhere else that we go to. But I also think you're kind of given the option to do it again. In a sense, the reincarnation thing, but my own kind of take on it is that you get a chance to kind of be born again and do your life again, to do things differently or to learn more or to kind of have different experiences. And that's why I think we get the whole deja vu, where you feel like you've done this before when you haven't, because you possibly have in a past life, in a past time that you've done this life. That was great
Yeah.
English. Well done, Charlotte.
So, so do you mean like would you come back as like do you think it's like I suppose like a multi-dimensional where you could come back as you but make different choices? Or do you think you would come back as, just as someone else like another life?
I'm not really sure. I'd like to think that you could come back as you and make different choices and, maybe go down a different path
Mm,
potentially. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I like the idea of maybe being able to come back as somebody else, but in with your own, like the same consciousness, but in a different body,
body.
maybe.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So what do I think? Well, I mean, I'm like you. I'm not religious, but I'm not like what did you call it? Was it agnostic?
I think
I'm not,
agnostic is where you believe in a higher power rather than like
yeah,
a god or like conform with a certain religion. I think atheist is where you believe in nothing, and it's
nothing.
like there is
I'm definitely not that.
no.
Yeah, I can't I just can't wrap my head around the idea that there's nothing. I am a spiritual person, so I mean, I've prayed, but I'm not religious, but I've prayed to a higher being or, a bigger presence than my own. So I definitely believe in something. But when it comes to death, I'm not really sure what I believe. I definitely know for sure that I do not believe that we go through all our lives learning and growing for it all to be over when we die. I just like we were talking earlier on, I said to you, I can't like because even if you just look at like when you're 16 or 17 and you think you know it all and you do you know what, even at my age now I'm 41, I'll be 42 soon, right? And I even look back on me like 5 years ago and think I've learned so much since
Yeah.
then. I've come a long way since then. And I know that in another couple of years, I'll be looking back at me now going, who did I think I was?
You
I've
didn't know
come
anything.
such a long way. Yeah. So it just that alone says to me, we learn so much through our lives and we have these opportunities to, grow and evolve and grow through everything that we go through. And I think not to toot my own horn here at all, but I feel like if I carry on growing and evolving and, becoming more of the woman that I am trying to become, then I'm going to be a pretty awesome person by the time I'm like at the end of my life.
Yeah.
Hopefully, now, just touch wood again, that's going to be in at least another 45 years, at least, right? So I'm going to have like reached, I think, a pretty epic level of awesomeness as a person. Like I'm going to be a really nice person because it's something that I have high morals, I have high ethics, I try to always do the right thing. I might make mistakes, but I definitely learn from them. And so I can't wrap my head around the idea that I would go through all of that to just have blackout curtains
Yeah.
closed, end of scene, nothing coming next. I I just can't understand why that would be the case, right? So I probably believe similar to you in that, we go through life or our lives growing and evolving. And I think that I don't know if we come back as the same person, in like maybe a different dimension. We get to do the same thing and make different choices. But I think that we make as a spirit, as our soul, wherever it goes to, I think we have a choice once we leave our bodies to come back again and maybe experience a different aspect of life, to go through different things, to get the human experience and to get a level of understanding. So maybe you'll come back as a not very nice person who has to go and experience why people deal with anger and hatredness and things like that. Or then you would, and I think that when we talk about old souls, we talk about people that have been here before. Something we say so many times, you can look at that kid and you go, oh, that's an old soul, wise before their time, because they've probably chosen different incarnations to come back into, to
Mm.
learn. And maybe the more understanding you are as a person, say, now, I think I'm a pretty non-judgmental, forgiving and understanding person. And maybe that's because I've been here before so many times. I have experienced the life from many different angles and I have a greater understanding of it.
Mm.
So then maybe when I die the next time, I'll be at that point where I'll say, I'm ready to move on to the next plane
Yeah.
now, because I've experienced it, this way, this way, this way, and this way. So now I'm ready to progress to whatever comes next, whatever that may be. And I have no idea what that might be.
Mm.
But I think like you said, you can choose to come back and re-experience things or experience things from different perspectives. But I think you can also choose to then move on. Or maybe when you're ready to move on, the choice becomes apparent when it
Yeah.
happens.
Mm.
And, maybe that's another plane of existence that we can't fathom now. Like we talk about us, like as if you talk about like a two-dimensional character on a piece of paper, a 2D character has no idea of the 3D world around it, can't conceive of it because it's a different dimension. So, as 3D or 4D, you can't conceive of what comes next until you're actually there, and then you can look back
Mm.
on the other things and see them. So maybe it's something like that, like a different dimension of being that we can step into.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because I'm sure, I'm like you, I can't get my head around the idea that we go through all of these life experiences and learning and growing and all of that for it to just be pull the plug and nothing, no
Yeah.
consciousness, no like no overseeing the world you left, no ability to come back, no, like I can't fathom that. And the fact that I've had kind of interactions with mediums over the years that have kind of reinforced to me that there is spirits on another side that can communicate. I just know that there's just no way that it is a nothingness. It has to be a something. But,
Yeah.
I do think that, you get the option to come back, because you do, look at children especially. You can just be like, oh, they have been here before. Like I was, I'm sure of it with Darcy, because she was like a baby for all of about 30 seconds before she decided she wanted to be a child, because she was like already been there, done that, I've done this before, like let's just move on.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I just think you're given the option, and yeah, maybe it does get to a point where you do it however many times, and then you realize that you want to actually become part of, like a spirit realm, or whatever
Mm,
dimension you want to call it.
mm. Yeah. And then that's when maybe then you can get crossovers, or like we have, our spirit guides, and maybe that's something that we can attain to be when we reach that level of enlightenment. We can
Mm.
cross over then and become a spirit guide and learn how to communicate with people in our dimension and offer guidance and assistance where it's asked for and where it's wanted.
Yeah.
So I mean, my ideas on what happens after life is that's probably it. Like I don't know, but that is probably it in a nutshell. I don't think I believe in, excuse me, heaven and hell per se. But an interesting perspective that I was once told on that is that another person I spoke to about this a long time ago said that they did believe in heaven and hell, but they believed that when you were alive, it was hell. And when you died, that was your heaven, your nirvana. And that when you're living, life can be so hard. Like nature is cruel.
Yeah.
We know that. You watch any nature shows or documentaries, nature is cruel. And I mean, I suppose it's how you look on it. And I thought this was an interesting take, but the hell is your time on earth because there is so much suffering, even if you're lucky enough to be born into a country like what we have, where we have, so much help and so much is given to us. We don't really suffer with like starvation or droughts or war.
Yeah.
We don't have any of those extra things to deal with, but we still have our struggles. Can't pay your bills this week, might get evicted from your house, and these things, which is hard. And all right, it might not be as hard as it is for people in, Africa dealing with drought or famine or, unsafe drinking water and AIDS epidemics and everything that they've had to contend with in those countries. But it's as hard as it can be. It's our equivalent to that, because that's as hard as the hardships that we know and we can face over here. So yeah, life can be a struggle and it can be really hard, and it can be really happy as well. But that was that person's view, that life is hard, nature is cruel, life is hard, things are tough, but then when you die there's something better waiting for you. And I thought that was an interesting take, but it's not something that I can see where they're coming from and what they're saying, but it's not necessarily something that I believe in. I don't believe that, when you're a good person, you go to heaven, and if you're a bad person, you go to hell, because
Mm.
good people do bad things sometimes, and bad people do good things sometimes.
It's
So
subjective.
it's subjective, yeah. And I do believe that it's an experience, and it's a learning, and it's to help. Like my point is that what you go through helps you become a more evolved and enlightened human being. And whether that means you have to be reborn 100 times, 1,000 times, a million times, till you reach that level of enlightenment, then that's what it means. But then I think that yeah, there's got to be something more when you reach that level of understanding
Mm.
in life and you have that much knowledge. It has to be put to use somewhere. It really
Yeah.
does. So, like, when it comes to dying, I'm not actually scared of that. That doesn't fill me
No.
with fear or anxiety or dread. I think that it's probably something quite exciting to experience. And what happens beyond is a mystery, and a mystery is always compelling.
Hmm.
And something I say something to look forward to. And this could be taken really out of context. So, I'm not trying to say that I'm looking forward to it or anything like that, but I don't find it like frightening. But what I do worry about is the people I leave behind. And that's where the fear and the anxiety comes into it for me.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same as you in that sense that I feel like, there will be something wonderful coming or an option to, come and do this again. So the actual, you know, physical dying doesn't scare me. It
Yeah.
is, yeah, it's leaving the people behind. It's leaving, my kids and thinking, who's going to look after them, who's going to do this
We'll
and
be
who,
there for them.
yeah, who's going to watch over them and help them and
Yeah.
guide them. And
Yeah.
it's inevitable, and the normal way that the world should work is that, children outlive the parents. That is the
Yeah.
normal kind of process that you go through. So it's inevitable that the kids will be left without me at some point.
Yeah.
Just hope and like touch wood. I don't have that much wood near me, but touch my head that it's not going to be for another, 50
Long time.
odd years, hopefully. Um,
Yeah.
so I hope it won't be until they're, much older and much more self-sufficient. But yeah, that is the thing. It's leaving the people behind that are so reliant and dependent on me that I worry about. That's where the fear factor comes in of what happens to them when I'm
Yeah.
not here.
Yeah. And maybe as well, I was just thinking a bit more about it when you were talking then, is it's me really hoping and praying that when I do go, I am that much like the end of my life is when I am an old lady, so that
Mm,
my kids have hopefully grown up, moved on, started their own families, or settled down a
yeah,
little bit, and I know that they're okay.
yeah,
Because once I know that, then I think that's where, that's the only thing that gives me quite a bit of fear, is that, will my kids be okay?
yeah,
Like, will my husband be okay? Will my kids be okay? Will my cats be okay?
yeah,
And that's where, for me, that's where the fear factor comes in, because I know that if, I mean, obviously your kids are always going to be your kids. They're always going to be your babies. You're
yeah,
never going to look at them and see them quite as the like adult person that they grow up into. You're always going to look at them and see them as, that little girl or that little boy that you had. But if my kids are like my age and have their own kids, I have grandchildren and stuff, then I'll know that, look, they're a big boy now. They're a
yeah.
big
They
girl
can
now.
handle it.
They can handle it. They'll
Yeah.
be okay. Um, but something that I think is really weird about death, dying, what happens after life, is the lack of discussion as a society. Growing up in England and Ireland, the lack of open discussion about it that I've
Mm,
experienced in my life. And the more we sort of poked at this as a topic to do on a podcast, the more I thought, oh, why is it that we don't talk about this? Or that if we
yeah.
do try and talk about it, it's instantly seen as morbid, and people get upset and people get stressed, and people get upset and stressed and worry because we don't talk about it. So
Mm,
it's weird. And because it's, really often associated with heartache and loss and fear and anxiety and upset, people tend not to talk about it a lot. And it got me wondering, like, why don't we do that? Why don't we approach this subject when we're kids in schools?
mm,
Why don't we talk about it more? Why is it always got to be such a frightening thing to discuss? Because even like when I told you, when I tried to bring it up with my family, they
mm.
all freaked out, and it ended up with my son panicking and asking me if I was going to die soon. I was like, no. I'm just curious as to like how this word makes you all feel, and why everyone is so scared to talk about it. And I mean, maybe that's just my weird brain, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, why are we all so, reluctant to discuss this? Because every single person, it's going to happen to you. It is going to happen to you. Like, show me a person that managed to avoid it, because there isn't one. Like, it happens to us all. And we're all so weird about talking about it. And I think that, discussions about death, dying, open discussions with families, about what they think comes next, and, rituals that we can do, so that, I mean, even a funeral, the funerals that I've been to have been so sorry now, but I'm gonna say they've been dreary and depressing
Sad.
and very sad, and very everyone dressed in dark colors, and there's been no celebration of life. And when people are born, there's a massive celebration of the beginning of a life. Every time we have a birthday, we have a celebration of another year of our life. And, I think that somewhere along the way, what we're celebrating has maybe been lost, because I feel like when we get to the point that we're, at our deathbed, there should be funerals should be a massive celebration of the life of that person. And
Mm,
maybe we should focus more on the happiness or the love and the experiences that that person has shared and brought into the lives of others. And if we focused more on the positives and everything people learned from that person, or that person taught them, or, all of these things, we could maybe flip the script
mm,
on the societal views and thoughts and fears over death, and we could make it something more than what it is at the moment. Because, I really want people to remember me when I go with fondness in their hearts and happiness and celebrating. I want them to celebrate my life. I don't want them to get all morbid and depressed. And
mm.
yes, it's loss. You're losing somebody who you love and you care about, and that does leave a hole in your heart. It does leave a gap, but that person will live on in your memories. Like, they're never truly gone, because they're always alive in your memories, and
Mhm.
you can always remember them, and, remember the happiness that they give you, instead of it being associated with so much fear and, upset and heartache.
Yeah.
And I could be alone in thinking that. And, that as I'm talking about it, it's kind of, I'm tailing off, and I'm thinking, I probably, do I sound heartless? I don't know if it's heartless. Do I sound like I'm just heartless and just want to have a party? Maybe. But that's my thoughts on it anyway. And the more I think about it, the more it weirds me out that, we don't do those sorts of things.
Mm.
I
No,
don't know.
I think I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. And, I remember, so the first funeral I ever went to was for my dad, and
Yeah.
no one wore black. It was all bright colors. It was the same when Bumper passed, Grand Mary passed, we didn't do black. Some
Yeah.
people did. There was more, for my grandparents, there was obviously the older generation that was set in the ways of black suits because that's what we do. But we've always referred to it as a celebration of life rather than a
Yeah.
mourning of death, because actually it's kind of like, in a way, like, and this is probably going to potentially come across the wrong way, but I think it's kind of disrespectful for the person who's died if you're sad, because they wouldn't want you to be sad.
Yeah.
They've had, an amazing life, whether it be, they passed at the end of their life, or they went too soon, or whatever the circumstances is. Up until that point, you know, they brought you happiness and joy and love, and it's quite, you know, it's weird that we'd be so upset. And I know that sounds really weird coming from me, considering how, like, I have been devastated at all the losses that I've had. And obviously, I'm not saying don't cry when somebody dies, but I think it is, you can be sad about the loss of the physical person and then remember all of the good times, all of the love, the joy. And this is why, like, I strongly believe you either kind of pass into a spirit realm of some form, or you come back again, because, the people that you lose are never fully lost. They're never
Yeah.
gone. They're always somewhere. They're either going to come back to you in another person, or they're going to be around in other ways to communicate. And
Yeah.
I remember I wore bright pink to my dad's funeral, a dress that had like flowers all over it and it was pink. And, it was like, my mum called it a celebration of his life rather than kind of mourning his death. And I think it should be more like that, but we don't talk about it enough. And I'm sure that's why there is so much like taboo around it.
Yeah,
There's quite a few topics when you really think about it that are just topics of conversation that people don't like to have.
yeah,
And, I think we kind of need to like draw a line under that now in the world that we live in where everybody wants to be open and honest about stuff. There needs to be topics that we need to just talk about. Like, and I'm going to say it kind of falls in the same category as talking about periods because
yeah,
people don't want to talk about them, but we should. And
yeah,
people don't want to talk about death. They don't want to talk about dying. They don't want to talk about what they think happens. They just want to pretend like it's not going to happen and be blissfully unaware.
yeah,
And I don't understand it because the more you talk about topics, it makes things less scary. It makes people
definitely.
understanding. It makes you kind of more open to discussing it and feeling more comfortable with it the more you talk about it. So I don't get why we wouldn't. That doesn't make sense to me.
Especially when it happens to us all.
Mm. Yeah, everybody. Nobody gets
Yeah.
out alive.
Yeah, literally like and when they do, I want to know how did that happen? Vampire? Hmm. But
Yeah.
like but I agree. I really agree with you. It's one of those topics that when you mention it, people panic.
Mm.
They think, are you dying? Are you sick? Are you ill? Why are we talking about this? There must be a bad reason for it. And there isn't, but it is something. And you know what? When I was thinking about this the other day, I was thinking, this probably sounds, again, because of how our society is, and I even feel weird saying it, but I think it's a really good idea, and I'm definitely going to work on mine. But like, we plan, I say we, I never was this kind of girl, but like people plan their weddings. They plan their lives. They plan, oh, I'm going to have a baby. They plan these
Yeah.
things generally, right? Generalizing again. Nobody plans, it sounds really weird, nobody plans their death. Like
True.
nobody has like a death plan. Now I know that obviously you can't plan your death. It's going to happen when it happens. It could happen anytime. But like if we talk about this sort of thing more, when I say plan your death, I mean like plan your funeral.
Mm.
Like we don't have open discussions about our funerals. Like we might tell one person, oh, I want to be cremated. Oh, I really like this song. Definitely play that at my funeral. But like you plan your wedding down to the last detail. I mean, even what color bloody napkins you're gonna have, right? Why don't we plan our funerals like that? Why don't we make it like, yes, I'm gonna have, oh, it's gonna be just how I want it. Yeah, and everyone knows, you know what I mean? Like we have these, I want to call it my death plan. This is my death plan. This is what I want when I die. That's what I want everyone to do. Um, yeah, so my crazy idea of having a like death plan for your funeral. I think like as I was saying that, I'm like, we have funerals, like what am I talking about? But what I'm trying to say is that we plan our weddings, we make these huge life plans, and it is so normal to talk about it. It's like the most normal thing in the world to talk about as a kid, what I'm gonna do when I grow up or when I get married and blah blah blah. And it's totally socially acceptable thing to talk about. But we don't talk about our funerals and look, hey, when I die, this is what
Mm.
it's not something that you grow up having a discussion about around the kitchen table. And I really think that, as a society, and I'm only speaking from my own experience and what I know. So if you have been someone who's been lucky enough to grow up in a household that is very open about talking about, death and dying and funerals and things like that, then I would love to hear from you because and what your views are on it. Because I believe that if we were more comfortable talking about the subject of death as a society in general, and like with our children, you know, it would be maybe it would make it a little bit easier. and there would be less fear around it, and it would just make the topic a little bit more friendly, because it kind of brings me on to our last thing that we wanted to talk about, Charlotte.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because we did, obviously, I know you posted up a thing on Facebook before we started recording this podcast, just asking a lot of people's opinions and views. And there was kind of mixed views, but a lot of people had the same thing of just feeling really scared of it, anxious, nervous, but mostly it was for the people they were leaving behind. And I think that's similar to what we've been saying is we're not scared of, end game because it happens, but it's what happens to the people that you leave behind. Um, and yeah, there was quite a few people that were saying the same thing. We did have some really good comments from one lady who was like totally had a whole plan and a checklist, and her life was already sorted for what was going to happen if, like, her husband passed. So but yeah, there was quite a few people saying that, they were very scared of it, really,
Mm.
which, and scared for their children that they were leaving behind.
Yeah, yeah, I was just flicking through some of them there, and there was so many that I've noticed the word terrifying a
Mm,
couple of times. Anxiety, anxiousness, terrifying. Um, and a lot of the ones that have come from, particularly parents, the mums, saying that they're worried about the ones that they're leaving behind. They're worried about their kids. How are they going to cope? And that's part of the reason why I think that if we made it a more socially acceptable subject to talk about,
mm,
we'd be in a much better place, because obviously everyone wants to live a long life, make sure their kids are okay and die a nice peaceful death at the end of it and move on to the next life. But and in an ideal world that would happen for everybody, but we don't live in an ideal world, and sometimes things happen that mean, you're taken too soon, or people are taken too soon. And yeah, that worries me. If something happened to me in the next 10 years, would my children cope?
mm,
I don't think they would cope half as well as if something happens to me when I'm in my 80s or 90s.
mm.
And they've had time to think about their own mortality as well, and to come to grips with it, because I do feel at this moment in my life that the idea of death is more of a calm, slowly growing peace that we all grow towards,
Yeah,
because I feel like as I've got older, I'm craving peace more and more, inner peace, outer peace. I cut drama out of my life and I become a more peaceful person. So to me, it's like a peaceful progression towards what will inevitably be something peaceful, if
yeah,
not something that, like, as we spoke about in this earlier, all the knowledge that we learn. And that's what made me think about it. I was thinking everything we learn in life, and then all the people I know as they get older become more peaceful and more at peace with themselves and more confident in who they are as a person. And like, that has to be a clue to me. That's a big clue that you're moving towards something
yeah,
knowledgeable, wisdomful, or whatever, and
yeah.
peaceful, a peaceful time, like a peaceful passing.
Mm.
So, um, I find it strange that when it is something like that, we would still feel so scared and so anxious and so weird to talk about it.
But I think that does like 100% come back to not being able to talk about it and have open and frank discussions, because the more that we've been talking about it, the more I've one realized I don't have a death plan and probably should get one, because
Yeah,
I have two kids. I know what one I want to
same.
happen, but I've never had this conversation. But like I think because like when I was growing up, we you never really spoke about death unless you were dying. So the only two like real conversations I had with someone about their death was with my dad and my nan before they passed away, because they were already like running out the clock. But,
Yeah.
like me and my mum have never spoken about it because she's in perfect health and has no intention of going anywhere for a long time. So, you only really speak about it unless you absolutely have to. And at that point, I think it's a bit too late because the person you're leaving behind is then thrown in at the deep end with, you're not going to be here, and oh, let's talk about where I'm going to go. Like, I think if we just
I,
spoke about it from, like we do with, I sit down and I talk to Grace about what she wants to do with her GCSEs and her career, and, if she wants to get married and have kids and all of that kind of stuff. But like, why shouldn't I then sit and be like, you know, what's going to happen at the end of it all?
yeah. Yeah. Why is it like such a hard thing to talk about? And I think it's something that should be talked about a lot because when I was in my 20s, how I envisioned my funeral is very different to how I envision something like that now. It's just very, very different because I've grown and I've changed as a person. So this should be a conversation that is always evolving that you have with the people you care about. And I
Mm.
I just totally resonated with everything you said there. This is not a conversation that I ever had with my family, with my parents growing up. It's
No.
not. And it was a subject when I knew that granny, when my granny was dying, my great granny, we knew that she didn't have long. And that was the first time that I'd ever really had anyone talk about dying with me. And I was like 8 years old. And it was so frightening. It
Mm.
was just like, but I don't want her to die. I'm really frightened about it. I don't, and it wasn't really talked about
Mm.
because it upset people. And I think that, yeah, I absolutely agree that it should be, the kind of thing that we can just approach normally, like when you're sitting around the dinner table, like you said, when you're like, oh, how are you getting on with your GCSEs? What do you think you're going to do about that? Like, why isn't it normal to say, oh, look, right now, if I die tomorrow, then I really want you to wear that pink dress because you look really good in it.
Yeah.
And I want you to play this song, right? And I want you to do this because that's how I remember you being at your happiest. And that's what I want you to do.
Yeah.
And then like next year it might change to something different. But why couldn't that be something we could say without soliciting complete panic and fear from everyone around us, like, oh my god, are you okay, are you ill, is
Mm.
something bad going to happen to you? Because it's just, like we said, it's just not something that's kind of been, in my experience and obviously in yours as well, it's just not been like a socially acceptable conversation to have around the dinner table, and or wherever, I say around the dinner table, I just mean in your home in general, like when you're sitting down and talking.
Yeah.
But we also had another comment that I just wanted to touch on because I feel like this is another episode as well with a lady who had a near death experience, and
Mm.
that she said that experience has made her no longer afraid to die because she knows what to expect. And I have strong hopes that we might get her to come and talk about her story.
That would be
But I find
amazing.
that incredibly interesting,
Hmm.
and yeah, like the same as what you said, the more we've talked about this, the more I've realized that I don't have a funeral plan or a death plan or anything like that, and it's not something that we talk about here, and I think I want to change that for
Mm.
my family so that it's not such a scary thing when it might happen.
I do. Like, I think it's something that I'll definitely sit and touch on. Like, maybe not so much with Darcy. She's two. She probably won't understand what I'm talking about. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely with Grace, like, we'll sit down and have this conversation because I think it's important. Like, and it's not a sad thing, but people jump to it being such a sad thing because that's all we've ever known.
Yeah.
But that's the same with everything. And, like, there's so many things that we can talk about freely now that years ago were so taboo, and so many like subjects that people would refuse to talk about in polite conversation. And,
Yeah.
like I was saying to you earlier, like in 2024, when we can basically identify as anything we want to, and nobody's allowed to have a problem with it, and we can be anyone you want to be and do basically anything you want to do, and nobody's allowed to get annoyed about it. Why can't we talk about the afterlife without people getting sad?
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. I really do. And getting sad or it being socially unacceptable.
Yeah.
I mean, it it and there's so many ways that you can bring it into, like, you if you have a plant that dies, you can make a whole little ritual with your kids on how to deal with it. If you it's more sadder, but if you have a pet that dies, you can have a
Mm.
plan for what you want to do and to help your kids, understand. And you can talk about it. And those kind of things happening are
Mm.
great, like, ins to talk about it with younger children, especially, or an older relative dies, or even someone on the telly, or
A character in
a
a
public
TV
figure.
show or something. Yeah.
Yeah, you can take that moment as a teaching moment and as a moment to start bringing that conversation in to your
Mm.
house a bit more and making it less of a terrifying ordeal, because it really was terrifying for me as a child.
Yeah, me too. I was young when my dad got sick and we had to sit down and talk to people about the fact that he was going to die, and that was my first exposure. I was like 11, when, nearly 12 when we got
Mm,
the first kind of like sit down, and that's so much to take on
so
any
heavy.
when you're that young, like that's really
Mm,
heavy, but it was the first exposure and it was already a sad thing because it
yeah,
wasn't like an exposure to, so everyone doesn't live forever, this is potentially what happens, this is what we think happens, but eventually people do come to the end of their life. Like it's already a people come to the end of their life, by the way, and by the way your dad's gonna die. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
so, like, yeah, it's so much.
And when you don't talk about it ever, and you don't talk about it with your parents, and you don't have that safety net, I suppose, as a child of growing up, having your parents or your carers or whoever, is there for you when you're a child to talk about it with, because they're the ones that make you feel safe when you're a child.
Mm.
Those caregivers, they're the people that are there for you. And then to suddenly lose one of those as your first experience is so heavy.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, if we talked about it with our kids to the point that it was so okay that if something horribly tragic like that happened, it wouldn't be like such a double whammy.
Mm.
They'd have to deal with the loss, but they would already have a
They'd
kind of
already know.
understanding. Yeah,
Yeah.
an understanding of death and what you think, and your plan and what's going to happen next, and that they'd already still have that kind of security that you would have been there for and gone through with them, so that it's not like, wow, someone's just pulled the rug completely out from underneath them and they have no clue, and that then one of those people that they rely on isn't there
Yeah.
anymore to be
And
able
they
to guide them and help them through this.
and you have so many questions. Like I remember having so many questions about, well, where do they go? What happens? What happens after this?
Yeah,
What do we do with this? Where does the body go? What do we do? Because I'm a kid, like
yeah,
you don't
yeah,
know, but like how you can't ask those questions because it's not socially acceptable to ask somebody, well, where are you going to go when you die? Like
yeah.
it's not.
Yeah,
I laugh when I say the question because we have these conversations really openly and really frankly, and I don't have an issue with talking about it, but I can like picture relatives of my faces. If I
yeah,
was to
or
ask my
shushing
mum
you.
this question, oh my God.
Yeah.
If I rung my mum up tomorrow and I was like, so what are you going to do when you die? She'd be like, Charlotte, no, thank you. Let's not have this conversation. I don't want to think about dying. Like,
Yeah.
genuinely, she would. Like,
I can imagine, like, my grandma or my aunts shushing me if I was
yeah,
asking awkward questions like that, just don't speak about this stuff now. No. Shh.
yeah, it's
And
not
just
the
not,
time.
not wanting me to speak about it, or giving me the look, the look, like when you're saying something and then one of the adults in the room, like as a child, then one of the adults in the room just gives you the look like, zip it.
Yeah.
You don't ask these questions now.
That's
Everyone's too
not polite
emotional.
conversation.
Yeah. But I think that, like, I'm not saying that it would make it easier to cope with the loss of, a immediate family member, but I think if we had these discussions more openly, um, with our kids, they would have some level of preparation, and I think that would, serve them really well going.
Mm.
forward into life and make it a much easier thing to kind of talk about and deal with and discuss.
And maybe in turn, it would make it easier for us as parents, because that seems to be the running theme of
Exactly.
feedback
Yeah.
that we got, was that parents are anxious about how their kids will cope and how they will feel and
Mm,
what they will do. And if we've had these open, frank discussions their whole lives, then we would
we
know
don't
that
need to be
they're fully
anxious.
equipped. Yeah, we don't
Yeah,
need to be anxious
exactly.
because they're equipped with the knowledge. And, and I've said this before, I'm sure, like, knowledge is power. If you know things, you can control
Yeah.
things a different way, and you can manage how you feel about stuff. So then as a parent, you don't need to be anxious or worried about your kids, because you know that they have everything they need. And
Yeah.
like, on that topic, like, we equip our children with every life lesson. Like, our job is to obviously make sure that our kids know about, like, food and hygiene and stranger danger, and
Yeah.
how to drive a car when they get to a certain age, and how to go through school. You teach them all of these like life lessons to mold them, but we don't teach them about the one thing that could potentially rip their world apart.
Yeah.
That actually seems a bit mad.
Yeah. And it does. It does. It really and I've really enjoyed doing this
Mm,
podcast because it's really made me think, and it's made me realize, things that I need to do better for my kids and for myself as well. And
yeah.
like, it's so true. Like, we give them their blueprint for life, our kids. We give them the blueprint for life. We show them through our actions and our words and our guidance how to be a human, how to be a woman, how to be a man, how to cope with stress, how not to cope with stress. We show them all of these through, even when we don't realize we're teaching anything, they watch us all the time and learn. So being able to have open and frank discussions about something that is seen as kind of taboo, scary, frightening, and something that people just don't seem to want to talk about,
Mm,
I just think it could really, really help in so many ways. And I know so many people actually have serious anxiety over it.
yeah.
Like, this could be a big thing going forward for the next generation to help them, you know, deal with a bit less anxiety. And for us as well, like you say, like, if I know that my kids know how I feel about dying, then I know that the way I feel about it will make them feel better,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that will make me feel better.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's the knowledge is power thing. Like, if they're equipped
Yeah.
with all of the tools they need, including what happens when you're not there to guide them, then there's nothing for anyone to be anxious about. You get to just kind of, I don't know what the word is, like, or the right words is, but you kind of just get to kind of go through the process and live the life without the anxiety around the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And developing your own ideas and views on what might happen at the end. And
Mm.
maybe it will help you live your life. Oh my gosh, sorry, my cat just jumped off the my cat just jumped off the wardrobe. Scared me to death. Scared me to death. Yeah, but you'll be able to live your life with a more calm sense of the inevitable, the impending inevitable, to what we all have to face eventually.
Yeah.
um and it might be really beneficial, so it's definitely a topic that I want to talk more about as well.
Yeah, I think we can probably dig into it in different areas. And it's definitely opened my eyes just having this conversation about, the whole thing, and seeing other people's views and being like, actually, yeah, I feel the same way, and what can we be doing differently? It's definitely been interesting. So I've really enjoyed talking about it, which sounds really weird, and people are going to think that's really
I
odd. I
know.
really enjoyed talking about death. Go figure.
I've I've also really, really enjoyed it. So it really made me open my eyes a little bit and think, I hadn't given any thought. And it's so I just the more I know I've probably said this a million times on this episode, and I'm sorry I keep repeating myself, but the more we talk about it, the more weird I find it that we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like, obviously, because it is that one inevitable thing that we all have to go through, the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm like, why aren't we all like discussing this kind of thing? Because it seems so bizarre to me. And also, the more I talk about it, the more I'm realizing that there is so much more to the subject of dying and death than just the dying thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, you scratch the surface, there's a lot you can delve into here. So I suppose I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for tuning in again. You know, we massively appreciate you guys and hope that you all know how much we appreciate you listening in to us. Apologies that this podcast was a couple of weeks delayed in coming out. We have had a lot going on. We've got a lot in the pipeline, so just bear with us. Hopefully that won't happen again, but we never know. We never know, but we will endeavor to get one out to you every week from now on. Remember to find us on Facebook and TikTok and give us a like and follow, and feel free to share any of our stuff and to get in touch with us at any time. We love hearing from you and we love getting your feedback back. And on that note, we are going to love you and leave you till next time.